Oh, thank you. I'm glad to be here. Always happy to talk about cyber warfare and topics like that. I'm currently the director of the cybersecurity programs at Western Washington University, and we have a number of different programs in that. In the past, though, I spent 33 years in the Army, both active and reserve. The last 19 of those years were as a professor at the United States Military Academy at West Point. In addition to that, I spent some time working with military intelligence and various other places in the Army, as well as I've had a rather full career in the civilian world, where much of what I've been done has been concerned with cybersecurity.
Thank you, Professor. So this malicious cyber worm called Stuxnet, what was so historic? What was so special? What was so new about it?
Well, really, the most new and special thing about it was that it became known to the public. And it wasn't totally unique in that there had never been a cyber attack before. It wasn't unique in that it was a fairly focused and structured attack. What was unique, though, was that we as the public became aware of it and became aware of what had been going on for some time in the secretive world of cybersecurity. And so I think that's probably the most unique thing about it. It wasn't the first active cyber war. It wasn't, or that could be termed cyber war, but it was one that became very obvious very quickly out in the world.
According to my understanding of this, this was the first time that something that was done in the, should I say, digital realm, something like a line of code, a program, a malicious program, was used to actually break something physical. That was the first time that had happened.
That was the first time that we saw that happening. There had been other instances that were much more limited and more detailed in scope. And in fact, probably most of the other instances that we've seen were combinations of cyber and kinetic attacks occurring simultaneously, where the effects of the kinetic attack were enhanced by the cyber attack.
Okay, and going into the future, I imagine that this is something that's going to continue. For example, I believe in 2017, the Russians attacked 3 utility facilities in, I believe it was in Ukraine. They attacked 3 facilities, and they were actually able to switch off power for over 2 million people. So is this something that we will see continue into the future?
Oh, we'll definitely see it continuing. It's been going on an ongoing basis. It's been tried throughout the latest war, where the Russians have continuously attacked the power systems. We've seen the kinetic effects. That's become more obvious. They've also made the attempts through the cyber world as well. So generally, what we can expect, though, is to see this combination of attempts both in the cyber world and in the physical world going on at the same time.
How would you describe information warfare?
Well, information warfare is trying to control the actions of your enemy through controlling information. That could be by providing specific information. That could be by denying access to information for an enemy. It could be through information provided to the populace of the enemy, or it could be information provided directly to the enemy. That information may or may not be correct, but we're trying to influence the enemy to take the actions that we want through the use or denial of information.
So the use of information in war isn't new, is it? Even before computers, intelligence services were using disinformation, misinformation, and propaganda as a tool of war.
Oh, definitely. It goes as far back as, you start looking at the histories, and they started talking about, for example, when the Persians were coming towards the Greeks, and they said, "We will cut them down like the pine trees," right? And so they went and consulted with the oracle at Delphi, and what does he mean by cut them down like the pine trees? And the oracle says, well, those are the kind of trees that when you cut them down, they don't grow back. And so there was an attempt to use information to,
You're referring to Leonidas?
yes, intimidate your enemy, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you can make your enemy scared through the use of information, you've accomplished a lot. Now the Greeks didn't really believe that would happen, and they went on to eventually win that war. But yet we saw the use of information warfare going on there.
So what specifically is cyber warfare?
Well, cyber warfare is different from information war, and it's different in that cyber war is warfare that's conducted through the use of electronic means, through the use of the internet, through the use of cyberspace. And we got to be a little careful, because sometimes cyber war and information war overlap, and sometimes you use cyber operations in order to accomplish information warfare objectives. Sometimes you use information warfare objectives to accomplish cyber objectives, and so they're in between. And then there's another one out there, which is electronic warfare, where we're trying to use electronic means to disrupt communications. And so if I'm disrupting communications and it's only voice, that's just electronic warfare. But if the communications channel I'm disrupting is carrying internet traffic or network traffic, now I've got
doing something within the electromagnetic spectrum, would that count as an example of that?
Yeah, any kind of attack in the spectrum would be an electronic warfare, but only those that directly affect the network become cyber warfare.
Okay.
And so they're different realms, but they're very much overlapping.
Okay, so if I understand you correctly, you could, in fact, most times information warfare is used within cyberspace. Many times.
Many times we're used cyber warfare to accomplish information warfare objectives, or we use information warfare sometimes to accomplish cyber warfare objectives. For example, if I want to accomplish an information warfare objective of denying information to the enemy, then I can use a denial of service attack, right? And I can go out and attack their ability to go get that information off the internet.
It sounds pretty rudimentary, right? I mean, denial of service, that's old, isn't it?
There's a lot that we see coming back again, that we just see it in different forms, and we start thinking about we're in the modern world, we've got new worries. The things that we're thinking about now are things that nobody worried about before, and everything else like that. But yet we go back and look at our history and look at Aeneas Tacitus, who was a strategian who was in Rome, a Greek in Rome, writing about Greek warfare strategies for the Romans about 400 years before the Common Era, 2,400 years ago. And you start reading his treatise, and you come to a chapter on passwords. And
did you say passwords?
Passwords, yes.
Okay.
And the problems with using passwords and using them properly, and even bringing about the potential for using multi-factor authentication in that. So, and yet 2,400 years later, we're still talking about passwords and the problems with passwords and how to deal with that. And
so another kind of attack I understand that's used in cyber warfare is ransomware. Where you encrypt all of your target's data and request a ransom. But I mean, if you're using ransomware as a tool of cyber warfare, you're not really asking for a ransom, are you?
Right. And this is more destructoware that we see that's doing that. Ransomware is more of a cyber crime type of thing where the criminals, their goal is to get money. In cyber war, if you're trying to do that, you're more trying to destroy the information or the systems of the enemy. So you don't bother with the ransom. You just have the same type of software that would go and make the ransomware attack, but you just have it wipe the hard drive, wipe the information out, and try and just completely destroy it because you don't need the reward or that. And now it's the same software for the most part that does both of those acts. It's just one, there's no expectation that you're ever going to recover. And no need to go chase the money coming out of it.
Okay.
And we actually see those applied by the same people. One of the things that Russia does is Russia tries to supplement their cyber force with these criminal gangs that are tolerated, but they're expected then to go and cooperate in times of war and to work on the side of the Russians.
Yeah,
And
probably with groups like the Sandworm is probably one of them.
Yeah, where they develop the stuff for their criminal activities, but then they can deploy it in wartime and on the side of the Russians.
Well, a specific ransomware attack, which was attributed to the Lazarus Group out of North Korea, it wreaked havoc across many organizations across the world. But the irony was that there was already a patch. Microsoft had created a patch for the particular vulnerability that allowed this attack to be possible. The fact that this affected so many companies around the world, what do you make of the fact that they didn't patch this vulnerability, even though there was a patch available?
Yeah, I think there's been a big problem in the past that's getting better, but it's still not completely resolved yet. But a big problem of people having the awareness that you need to keep up with and keep patching things and keep your systems up to date. And a lot of companies didn't make that connection that they could be vulnerable, and they look on it as an expense. I've got to spend all this time bringing all my systems up, and I've got to do this. And they didn't do a good risk analysis of what can happen if I don't do that. And as a result, they found themselves caught with their pants down or with their patches down, and left themselves wide open for this kind of vulnerability. And it just was carelessness, but carelessness that was accepted and allowed because they hadn't seen that happen before.
You think things have improved since then?
I think a lot of things have improved. I don't think they've improved everywhere. It's going to take a few more before everybody starts coming on board with it. But once people start getting that feeling that they need to do this and they're under a continuous threat, then we'll see that people will start doing it.
Sorry, please continue.
Yeah, I say if you look at the situation in the Ukraine right now, they're under continuous threat and they're under continuous attack, but yet they are being very resilient in the face of that attack because they've realized the necessity of keeping their systems up to date, of keeping their defenses up, and they've done a very good job of continuing that and not letting things go and not letting things slip. You go find any Ukrainian system, you're not going to find any vulnerabilities that have already been patched sitting on them. And we need to spread that kind of preparedness and awareness to the rest of the world, and that'll take care of a lot of those problems that we're seeing out there.
Which leads me into my next question of unknown vulnerabilities, what we refer to as zero-day vulnerabilities. Describe the concept of zero-day.
Yeah, and the idea is that we go out, or somebody goes out and finds a vulnerability that nobody else has discovered yet. And so it's a vulnerability that's been found before it's been brought to the notice of the makers of the software. So they haven't had yet the opportunity to go and make a patch and fix that. And so because there is no patch for it, now when I have that 0 day, I have a chance to go out and exploit a vulnerability that nobody has yet had an opportunity to patch. And so I have a weakness that I can take advantage of. Now, what happens is if I'm the bad guy, if I'm a cyber warrior, I have to sit and think about, well, what am I going to do with that vulnerability? Am I going to, let the vendor know so that they can go and fix it? Or am I going to go out and actively exploit that and see how much money I can make for myself? Or am I going to hold that vulnerability, that knowledge that I have of that vulnerability, really close so that if I'm in a situation, in a warfare type of situation, I can exploit that vulnerability that nobody knows about, but I know about, and I've got it sitting in my back pocket ready to attack at the right time.
Well, of course, there's a chance that someone else could always stumble upon that vulnerability, right?
There is that chance, yes. And so I've got to weigh that risk of, is it better for me to hold it until I need it? Is it better for me to exploit it immediately? Or is it better for me to have the vendor patch it immediately?
But if you discover a zero-day vulnerability, I understand that there are brokers now that legally sell 0 days. So you don't necessarily have to hide, do you?
Well,
I mean, to make a transaction, to try to sell, the knowledge of a 0 day to, I believe one of the companies involved in this is called Zerodium. They're a 0 day broker. And anyone in the industry would know what they're selling or what they're buying. So why?
you,
Go ahead. Go ahead.
you don't necessarily know what you're buying. You have an idea of what you're buying, and you hope that you're buying what you think you're buying. So I can describe things in a term where you have somewhat of an idea of what I've got, that I've got something of value, and then I can sell that to you. If you're the person that makes the software, you might want to buy the vulnerability from me because you want to go and patch your system. If you're a bad guy, you want to buy the vulnerability from me because you want to go exploit it in others. And although we can say that the market is legal, the one of the questions becomes, well, legal maybe, but ethical, that becomes an entirely different matter. And is there an ethical way to buy and sell vulnerabilities? Well, I would argue that possibly there's ethical to buy a vulnerability if it's on your own software, ethical to sell it if you're an independent researcher and the only place that you'll sell it is to the vendor of that software, and you're only selling it because you're trying to make up for the cost that it took you to go and discover that vulnerability.
But the line between the bad guy and the good guy is not that defined. I mean, it's blurry. I mean, if you're a military, you would want 0 day vulnerabilities to develop your cyber weapons. Does that mean you're a bad guy?
It not necessarily, no. And it means you're a bad guy if you're not one of us, but it means you're a good guy if you're one of us, right? And so there is that little bit there, but then we don't really our military really doesn't want to get into bidding wars with other militaries to by these vulnerabilities. They'd much rather see them go to the software makers and get them patched. Given the choice, that's what they're going to do with the vast majority of the vulnerabilities that they acquire either through discovery on their own or through some other means. Is they're going
You're
to
saying they usually report vulnerabilities?
Oh, yes. Vast majority of all vulnerabilities found are by the military are reported to the software manufacturers. It's only in very rare, exceptional cases that they'll hold on to it. In fact, to do so requires a fairly significant review up through various echelons of the services in order to go through that, what they call it, the equity process. Mm-hmm. Sounds like they're selling stocks or something. But it's a pretty involved process to make that determination of should we hold on to this to be able to exploit it. And it's only in very rare circumstances that ever actually happens with the U.S. side.
Would you say that the Russians are very good at weaponizing information? One thing that comes to mind is it's all the fake news that they flooded on social media in 2016 during the U.S. general election, and how they published the emails of Hillary Clinton's campaign manager. Those kinds of things. I mean, I don't know if it takes, real skill to do something like that, because the way they got into the DMC was just, using a phishing attack, which is pretty simple.
Yeah.
So would you say they're good at weaponizing information, or just more willing to weaponize it?
I think there's probably a combination of both. I think in the past they have been very good at weaponizing information, and they've also been very willing to do it. I think one of the things that we've been seeing in the last few years, and particularly as in the run-up to the last war and during the war, is they've been increasingly failing at being able to weaponize the information. And one of the things we've been doing, and we've seen our allies doing, that's been very good about countering that ability of theirs to weaponize information, is the opening and freeing and dissemination of information. Now, the more open information is, the more available it is, the harder it is for somebody to control it and try and weaponize it.
Well, so making information available is one thing, but some people, in fact, many people just go to one or two sources for the information. That makes it easy to kind of use this information on such people, right?
It does in the short term, but while there's a lot of people that will only use a limited number of sources, there's enough people going to different sources that when something gets strong enough and overwhelming, they're even going to start leading those limited sources into the right direction. And so we don't need to have everybody in, if we've got 10 people and half of them are only going to one source, the other half can start pulling those people and pushing the information to them and start getting them pointed in the right direction. And pretty soon their sources are going to change and start opening up too.
There many governments around the world now are developing cyber capability. In fact, some governments even have dedicated cyber units. The Israeli 8200, the U.S. Cyber Command, the North Korean Lazarus Group, I believe APT-1 from the Chinese People's Liberation Army. So is this a trend that we're going to see continue even among countries, even among poorer countries that don't necessarily have kinetic capabilities?
Oh yeah, definitely, because cyber has the ability to, it's one of those force multiplier things. where if I can punch above my weight in cyber by having a small but very capable organization that does it. And so it's a much lower investment than a lot of the big weapon systems and things like that. And so if I can use that, then I have an advantage. I can spend less money and get more capabilities. I can get more things out of it. So we'll see the continuing of the growth of cyber organizations within militaries and within government structures and things.
So in a sense, that does kind of levels the playing field, doesn't it? You know, I mean, if you're a small country and you have a really good cyber capability, you might be able to deliver a punch that might actually be, you know, really destructive to a country that's kinetically more powerful than you are.
It does do some of the playing field leveling. Of course, then when you start running into the countries with the strong cyber defense forces and the strong ability to punch back in the cyber world, you're still going to run up against where you're still going to be at a disadvantage as a small country.
That reminds me, I understand that the Stuxnet worm used 4 0 days, and that sounds extremely expensive. I think that's why many people believe that it was created by a major world power or more, one or more major world powers.
Yeah, and that is an expensive one to use that many 0 days. And you know, one of the things we saw with the Russians again, as they started off the Ukrainian war, they ramped up and decided to go out and take some real strong steps in cyber warfare and make some cyber attacks against the Ukrainians and against things in general. But one of the problems they had run into is they had pretty much used up their 0 days. And so they didn't have any big real surprises. They had some software that had been changed and updated with minor stuff, but the big vulnerabilities were not there. So that helped make what they were trying to do very much more ineffective than it would have been otherwise. You know, that was part of their problem with using all of these criminal related groups as a part of their cyber forces. The criminal related groups had no incentive to hold on to their 0 days because they wanted to go out and make money right away, right? And so they use their 0 days, and then the wartime comes and chest is empty, no more 0 days, but we'll rework some of what we've got and we'll go out after it. The other interesting thing along that line is that after a few months, we saw a lot of the criminal gangs of the Russians kind of fade away from the fight, the cyber war fight, and go back to their criminal activities, because it turned out they weren't making much money on going out and doing cyber war. So they had to go back and start earning some more money from their more traditional types of attacks and things.
So with the digital age came, you know, the ability for people to launch cyber attacks. Do you think it's a realistic consideration for governments to start moving back to analog systems?
No. It's probably always good to have some backups, you know, some paper for this and some paper for that, and maybe a few AM radios here and there and stuff.
So it's not like it is in the movies, huh?
No. But the problem is even with all the problems that we have and the vulnerabilities and everything, the digital world is so much more effective and has so much more capacity than the analog world that it just doesn't pay to go back into the analog world and back onto paper.
So Saudi Arabia, the Saudi state, was accused of using some platform or some monitoring platform to surveil the journalist Jamal Khashoggi. That was just before he was lured into the consulate in Istanbul and murdered. It was found out the Saudis are also accused of monitoring his family and his relatives, his friends, with this same platform. This platform is called Pegasus, and it was created by an Israeli group, an Israeli firm called NSO Group. So it's common knowledge that the Saudi government is not exactly, a democratic government, that they go after dissidents with a vengeance. What could be done to hold accountable firms like NSA Group, who create these kinds of powerful platforms and don't do proper due diligence before selling them to their client governments?
That's a really hard one. The problem is, how are we going to do due diligence? And, how do we look and see what the real intent of the organization that's buying one of these tools from us actually is?
You're saying us as in NSO Group?
Yeah. So say I have a tool that I could sit here and push a button and knock anybody off the internet, or hear any conversation of anybody on the internet anywhere, right? And so I made that tool, and now I want to sell it. Okay, so are there legitimate uses for a tool like that?
Yes, of course.
Yeah, because knock a terrorist off the internet, or listen to what a terrorist wants, right? Okay, so now I'm going to have an audience for people that want to buy that tool for me. And so if somebody comes to me from a government and says, I want to buy this for our intelligence service, okay, I can sell it to you. And I'm going to go check and see if you're on my list of good countries, and make sure that I'm happy with you. And so then I see you're on my list there, and then you turn around and sell it to some country that's not on my list.
So you don't see this particular problem being solved, do you?
I don't think so, because the other thing is, if I know what your tool can do and I know somewhat how it does it, I can have somebody else build me a duplicate of that tool.
Okay, understood.
And so trying to limit tools and limit access to tools, it gets, we can try that and do that to an extent, but there's a very limited extent of where I can do that. Besides which, I would rather have you buy the tool from me than somebody that made a copy of it, because one of the things I can do is I can put a back door in that tool.
Right.
And if I find that you're using it improperly, I can shut it down, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if you go buy the same tool from somebody else, I no longer have that back door.
Right.
But then I have to decide where is the point where I should use that back door. Because as soon as I use that back door once, now you're going to go find somebody else to give you the tool. And so, there's some real careful considerations there that I got to think about.
So one of the biggest problems that cybersecurity people face is the problem of attribution, trying to trace an attack to the exact origin, and that is one of the hardest things they have to do. Do you see attribution becoming more precise, more granular?
I think that's always a growing trend, because one of the things that we will be doing is we will be watching for general things that we can use then in order to apply attribution later. And so we can start monitoring, so to speak, the highways to see who's driving in and out on the internet, to see who then we can say, well, we just saw, country X's people driving in on the internet, and then this happened. Now we have part of the means in order to go refine and provide some of that attribution. And so, we start learning as we have problems. We have problems doing attribution now. So instead of waiting for each incident to start and then trying to handle each of those incidents, we can start building some of the tools to start collecting the things that we're going to need for attribution as that goes along.
Okay, but at this point, it seems to be a very difficult. In fact, from Arizona State Global Security Initiative, Dr. Nadia Bliss, I believe, said that even in attacks that are very well studied, attribution is not stated, at least not explicitly, to say the attack definitely came from here. And that poses a problem. One of the problems it poses is that if someone attacks you and you feel that you've correctly attributed the attack and attack that person, there's always the chance that you might be attacking or exacting revenge on the wrong entity.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a big challenge and a big problem. And that's part of the reason why we want to start building the tools to be able to watch and be able to make sure that our attributions are correct and our attributions are more refined and better. Now, of course, part of the problem is if we're trying to build that system to help support our future attributions, we're being somewhat intrusive in doing that.
Okay.
We're going to have to collect some information that's going to be somewhat intrusive, right?
That's correct.
Yeah.
Let's take a 2-minute break and we will be back. I am just going to run a commercial. Okay.
Great.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Welcome to Roberts E-Commerce Solutions. To promote your business or upcoming event on social media platforms, Roberts E-Commerce Solutions can help. Ensure your peace of mind by calling Roberts E-Commerce Solutions. From the intricacies of unleashing social media campaigns to scaling up visibility for your business by leveraging the use of Facebook-owned parallel platforms, Instagram, and WhatsApp, Roberts E-Commerce Solutions promises expertise. We can create and deploy promotional videos, flyers, and other digital assets concurrently, creating a multi-pronged approach that delivers visibility. For video promotions, we can use compelling motion graphics templates such as titles, intros, outros, transitions, logo reveals, and other elements to bring the essence of your ideas to life. Besides creating digital assets, we also understand how to navigate across the various business components contained within Facebook's Meta Business Suite, an appliance that centralizes and links Facebook to Instagram and WhatsApp, as well as the resulting analytics that can all be viewed on a single dashboard. Meta Business Suite allows small businesses the ability to effectively launch targeted ads based not only on geography, but also on demographics and the interests of potential customers. To schedule a free consultation, call 682-7-850-847 or email info@consult-res.net. Roberts E-Commerce Solutions, empowering small businesses and nonprofits.
Thank you. If you're just joining us, you're watching Insight, and today we're discussing cyber warfare, and I have as my guest Dr. Erik Frethiem of Western Washington University. Dr. Frethiem, so going into the future, do you think that militaries who do not develop cyber capability or coherent cyber strategy will be at a significant disadvantage?
Well, I believe you're correct there. Without at least the cyber defensive capabilities, they're definitely going to have a problem trying to keep their systems even functioning and going. For some organizations, it will be a little better because some of their systems are old and aren't as dependent on the internet. But especially for any military that's trying to be modernized and take advantage of all that digital systems can offer, that's going to be a huge problem.
Okay. Well, you in one of your correspondences to me, you quoted Karl von Clausewitz on war. He said, "War is a continuation of politics by other means." Were you implying that this also applied to cyber war?
Oh, definitely, yes. And people sometimes ask. They say, "We have a Department of Defense. Why don't we have a Department of Peace?" But the reality is, we do. We have a Department of Peace. It's called the State Department, and it's got inside of it all of the peace warriors, the diplomats and ambassadors, and all of these other people that are part of the Department of State. And it's only when the Department of Peace fails that we have to bring in the Defense Department in order to protect us and stuff. And so, if you think we don't have a Department of Peace, you're mistaken. It's just, it isn't always effective, right?
Mm-hmm.
We wish it was. We wish diplomacy was the answer. We wish treaties were the answer. We wish agreements among nations were the answer. But it turns out that it doesn't always work that way. And sometimes we have to apply other means than diplomacy in order to reach our end game or in order to protect ourselves.
Okay. What does it mean for an organization to reduce its vulnerability surface?
Yeah, and the idea there is that every time that we have a system or a program or a function that's exposed to the internet, we've increased the surface, we've increased the number of places that our systems, our computers, and our networks can be attacked. And so that's our vulnerability surface, is the various areas that we can be attacked. And if we're thoughtful about how we expose ourselves to the internet, how we run, which programs we run, which things we run, we can start reducing the vulnerabilities and reducing the surface that we have exposed to the internet.
So in a sense, cybersecurity is all about reducing your vulnerability surface, that there is no such thing as fully secured, a fully secure system, network, computer.
Exactly. Like I tell my students, the cost of cybersecurity is, endless and all consuming. We can always be spending more money fixing yet another vulnerability or fixing yet another problem. But our goal is to reduce our risk, take those steps that we can to bring our risk down to within an obtainable level, a manageable level where, the potential cost to us is less than what will break us, right? And so we do it by, making sure that we don't expose assets that are too large. We make sure we take care of those known vulnerabilities that are out there and fix them. Make sure we don't put things on the internet that don't need to be on the internet. We go and reduce the risk wherever we can and try and manage the risk rather than, well, I'm going to be the perfect internet person and have no vulnerabilities whatsoever. That's never going to happen, right?
Mm-hmm. So the foundation of the internet, of the current internet, ARPANET, was it built with security at the inception, with security in mind? Because my understanding is that security is really an afterthought as far as IP version 4 goes.
It is, but it didn't need to have been. And there were those of us that were arguing from almost the very beginning that we needed to incorporate security as a part of the internet. We needed to incorporate security as a part of the baseline protocols. I mean, the internet, the ARPANET was built in the first place as a secure network to try and route around problems and dangers and everything else like that. But we forgot, or we got ignored when we were started asking to put some security measures into it. And I think there was a feeling then, in the early years of the internet among people that it would be a place where we would all get along as a great happy family. And there was no need for security because we were all, equal citizens of the network, and nobody would betray each other. And it was just sing kumbaya and get along. Unfortunately, not everybody ended up coming to the internet with that same attitude. So,
well, had that been the case, had security been built into the foundations of the internet, into ARPANET, how different would the internet look right now?
That is so hard to predict. There are things that we wouldn't have. Some of the social media is, us going out and exposing our passwords to everybody, right? That's what Facebook is. It's a big password harvesting place. Because when you ask somebody a password, what's the first to make a password, the first thing they do is take something that's meaningful to them and use that to base their password.
Yeah, you just have to know them to guess their password.
Yeah, as long as, and so to know them, you just read their Facebook page or whichever, MySpace if they're older.
But I think the idea of of using phrases to create password, I think it's catching on. A lot of big organizations are trying to ingrain that into their employees, into their workers. So I see more and more, 10, 20 years ago, you'll see password like password 1. Come on.
Oh, that's still the number one password on the internet.
Oh, really?
Oh, yes.
Wouldn't you say it's improved? Because I notice a lot of people use phrases, they use special characters, which makes it harder for, say, a brute force attack.
Well, the special characters don't really do much of anything.
Oh, really?
Because we've gotten so used to using them that everybody knows an at's an A.
Oh, yeah.
And so that really doesn't do anything. But if we go look at the top 100 passwords used on the internet every year, the top 20 doesn't change very much at all from year to year. And password 1 is usually the top. Sometimes it varies, and we'll see something like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. But that's the biggest variation. The biggest variation actually in the top 20 is the big movie of the year. So, one year it's Batman, next year it's Superman, next year it's Wakanda. And so if you know what the big movie of the year is, you've got one of the top 20 passwords for that particular year. So now the good thing is, if you look at the top 100 passwords, 10 years ago, that represented about 70% of the passwords on the internet. Now it's probably down to about 30%. So it's still a massive amount of them, but it's getting better, slowly improving in the numbers that are out there now.
Well, oh, sorry, go ahead.
One of the interesting ones was there was one a couple of years ago that looked like it was a really great password. I can't remember the exact thing of it, but it was looked like a random string of letters. And so everybody's, hey, we got through to people. They're using, but for some reason, they're all using the same random string of letters.
Mhm.
Well, little deeper analysis looking at it, and if you know how people type their in Mandarin on the keyboard, they hit a key and then some selections come up. They hit the next key and they build their
Like
well,
suggestions.
yeah, and so it turned out that this quote random set of letters was actually Chinese for my password.
Wow. So a lot of one thing that could help, if social media platforms start forcing strong passwords. I mean, a lot of organizations do that. If you work for a big organization, you probably can make password one your password. You're not allowed to do that. You have to follow the password creation rules. If social media platforms start to do that, don't you think it will improve? Which means that even if you want to create a weak password, you're not allowed to.
Yeah, and that would be great if they would do that and start enforcing that, start training people how to make good passwords to use. Now, the other problem though that we run into is password sharing, and not sharing with other people, but sharing among the accounts. And so I go out and I get a password and I make myself a good password and I
And
use
use
it
it
for my
across all
bank.
your accounts.
Hmm? And I use it for some social media, and then I use it for some little obscure thing somewhere else, and it gets compromised there. Now all of a sudden they can go try it against my bank, try it against my social media, and boom, because I use the same password everywhere, it works.
I guess if security is layered. So, for example, they have your password, but if they try to log in, they have to go through a two-factor authentication, then they're stuck. So, I guess that's why layering security makes sense.
Definitely, yeah.
Which leads me to my next question. Describe the concept of defense in depth.
Yeah, and that's the idea that we know that whatever we do is going to get broken, whether it's a password, whether it's a multi-factor authentication, whether it's a firewall out on our system. We know that it's going to get broken, but what we want to do is make it harder, because instead of breaking one thing in order to get to our digital assets, we make it so they have to break several things.
Okay, right.
And hopefully they know how to break one, but they don't know how to break the next.
Mhm.
And we can build that layers of defense so that, and maybe they get to the easy stuff. They get into our social media account, but they don't get into our bank account.
Okay.
And we make it hard for them to, the more valuable something is to us, the harder we make it for them to get in.
How would you describe the dark web?
Dimly. No, the idea of the dark web is that there's a place where people do untoward things out there on the internet, and they try and build it in a way that avoids their getting caught, whether it's through the use of different tools or throwaway accounts or all of these kind of things. And so the challenge is you don't want to get caught, but at the same time, you want to let yourself be known so that the other bad guys can go out and find you, right? So that's where we start looking at Tor and the onion routing and all that kind of stuff, where I can put out some sort of address that people can get to, but yet that doesn't tie directly to me and stuff.
Okay. And I understand that's one of the most secure way people go to the dark web, using Tor,
Yes.
which is essentially very secure.
It has the potential to be very secure. Were I a criminal, I would not trust it myself. because it turns out that Tor has some very significant vulnerabilities in itself. If you own enough of the nodes in a Tor network or selected key nodes in a network, you can actually use that to track where people are going through the Tor network.
And actually actually see their traffic, the not encrypted. Are you able to view their traffic unencrypted?
Well, no, you won't necessarily be able to view their traffic unencrypted, but what you'll be able to view is who is going where and who is doing what kinds of things. You can see the metadata.
Okay.
And from the metadata, you can start to piece together what's really going on and what's happening. And so then that gives you the ability to figure out who did it and what it was that they did.
But even on the surface web, what's on the surface web, for example, if I were using a regular browser, Internet Explorer, whatever, and I were to find the IP address of a proxy server, say in Paris, and I entered that into the proxy settings of my browser, that makes it look like my computer is sitting in Paris. What's to stop me from committing a crime that will not be led back to me?
Well, somewhere that proxy knows where you really are, right? Mm-hmm. Inside of that proxy, it has to translate from what it's pretending you are in Paris to what you really are wherever you're sitting.
Okay, so once someone has the proxy server, they can find out where I am.
Right, right. Now, you could go through several layers of proxy to make it harder. It just means they have to then trace back all the way through all those proxies to find where you really are.
Okay. Do you think there'll ever be a framework, an international framework that clearly defines what an act of war is, a cyber act of war? So that there's no misunderstanding that, all of the countries involved, once they see a cyber act of war, there is no disagreement on what it is. Do you think that an international framework to come up with something like that will ever be possible? Would there also be a framework for how to respond in a proportional manner, nothing heavy-handed, but using a more measured retaliation, say not bombing a country because they broke into a bank, something like that. So will we ever have clear guidelines, international guidelines on what constitutes a cyber act of war and what a proportional response should look like?
No. we will have some
which makes cyber security even harder.
Yeah, well, we'll have like we have in other areas of war. We have in land war and air warfare and everything. We have definitions of certain things that are considered to be acts of war. Mm-hmm. But there's a lot of things that are left out of that, or that are purposely left to be kind of up for interpretation or very fuzzy. Mm-hmm. Because sometimes, if I'm a country and somebody commits an act of war against me, one that's well defined, now I have to take a particular action, right? I've got to respond. I've got to do something. But if they commit something against me, I say, well, I could interpret that as an act of war, but I'm going to be nice this time and let you off, and I'm not going to, that leaves me a lot more room for diplomacy and maneuvering around and things. So we while there's certain things that we do definitely want to have classified as acts of war, there's other things that we want to be on that fuzzy edge where we can use those as a part of our diplomatic maneuvering, and also we can use them in case of, we got 4 of these fuzzy things, so yeah, they're definitely acts of war and we're going to go attack you. Right. Okay. And so there's always going to be good degree of fuzziness that the countries want. They don't want that certainty, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Well, so a few years ago, Iran shot down a U.S. drone in the Strait of Hormuz. The U.S. responded with a cyber attack. I believe they took down the facility where that missile was launched from, and they did other damage, other cyber damage to Iran. Do you expect to see things like this happening going forward where you might see a kinetic response to a cyber attack, or a cyber attack to a cyber response to a kinetic attack?
oh, definitely, yes. And you know, the two, cyber and kinetic, are inextricably linked. And so, as a country, I need to look at, you know, what am I going to do that's going to accomplish my strategic objectives? And is that best done through something kinetic? Is that best done through something diplomatic? Is that best done through something cyber? And you know, what's the least cost but most effective way that I can accomplish what those objectives are?
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, my final question, well, before we end the broadcast, well, second to the last question, well, I guess I'm going to dare ask this. Who created Stuxnet?
Well, there's a lot of theories about that.
Huh?
And yeah.
I mean, it was created by somebody. It just didn't, it just didn't appear.
Oh, yeah.
But that seems to be a question that nobody has a straight answer to. So I just thought I should throw it out there.